we have before us First Nations Chief of the Stoney Nakota First Nations. We have Chief David Bearspaw representing Bearspaw First Nation. And we have Chief Clifford Poucette representing Wesley First Nation. And we have Chief Bruce Labelle representing Chiniki First Nation. And also at the table, witness table, you have the coordinator of the Independent Lobby for Amendment in the Oil and Gas Act, Mr. Eugene Seymour. And in the audience, to help the chiefs with answering questions, are legal counsels, the legal counsel Douglas Ray and John Snow, Jr., Director of Oil and Gas. Gentlemen, I presume you have a presentation, and I'll ask you to keep your remarks short so that the senators can ask questions, which I'm sure they will have some, so that we can get worthwhile questions in and worthwhile answers, which I'm sure will flow from both sides. Perhaps we can start with the Stoney Nakota Nations. Gentlemen, the floor is yours. Who is going to lead off in their presentation? And as I say, if we can keep it to about 10 minutes, the total presentation, that's ideal. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
E haini hibicha hewan togina piatsai jinomana tokinge chimite da haini hibi chatchen de dai nabicha sis nge dukeni chinga bezo na ta samge dia binan chin awasin chahewan no shnies. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My fellow chiefs and I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you for making the extra effort in allowing us to be here. Last month we had the opportunity to make a presentation to the House of Commons Committee on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development when Bill C-5 was in the House of Commons. At that time our views were reviewed courteously and with respect. However, we left with the feeling that members of the Commons Committee did not fully understand not just our position, but what Bill C-5 actually says. The background information on Bill C-5 prepared by the department, we believe, is somewhat misleading. While the bill certainly contains some worthwhile provisions, many, if not all, of these provisions could have been handled simply through amending the 1995 regulations under the existing Indian Oil and Gas Act. In electing to amend the Act rather than just update the regulations, the government has exposed our oil and gas resources in ways that the existing 1974 Act does not. Bill C-5 exposes our oil and gas resources to the risk of possible taxation by Canada, to the possible forced sharing of our royalties with other governments, and to unwanted provincial interference. The regulation-making power under Bill C-5 permits the incorporation of provincial laws that tax or force a sharing of our royalties. Penalties and fines collected by Canada via its enforcement provisions will not be considered Indian monies, sections 20 and 25, but are monies collected for the benefit of Her Majesty under section 4.2 sub 6. Penalties and other monies collected by the provinces may be kept for their own benefit, not ours. We would have therefore preferred if the current regulations had merely been updated rather than our having to deal with new legislation that enacts or permits the creation of regulations of such an ominous nature. While much has been said about the fact that the present Act dates from 1974 and is in need of updating, department officials have glossed over their failure to bring in any substantive new regulations since 1995. There are no legal impediments to new regulations under the existing Act. New regulations are not dependent on the passage of Bill C-5, since Bill C-5 does not provide for any future streamlining of the regulation-making process. Even with the passage of Bill C-5, future amendments to the regulations will remain subject to the same delays and roadblocks that currently exist. The concept of incorporating provincial laws and delegating their enforcement to provincial bodies is problematic in both principle and practice. How well this would work is dependent on the views of provincial governments. For this reason, we have asked that a new section 4.8.2 be added, a recognition of the ongoing fiduciary obligations the Government of Canada assumed when it accepted the surrender of our oil and gas lands. Department officials have suggested that the new administrative penalties provided for in Bill C-5 are not possible under the existing Act. But these new administrative penalties, by virtue of Section 17, do not apply the most important default, a failure to pay royalties. In his to you last week, the Minister appears to be under a misunderstanding in this regard. The fact that these penalties do not apply to a company that fails to pay royalties owing is another reason why we want the ability to cancel a lease that is in default. You might therefore ask the Minister why there have been no new regulations since 1995 and what exactly in the present Indian Oil and Gas Act prevents the government from just updating the regulations under the existing Act. But we are certainly not here today just to complain about new legislation concerning our oil and gas resources. We are here to improve that legislation. We also readily acknowledge the extent of consultation by department officials in regard to Bill C-5. Stoney Nakota representatives were very much involved in those consultations, and we appreciate the effort and expense that the government has carried out in this regard. However, we reject the notion that simply because department officials didn't agree with our input during the consultation process, that we are somehow precluded from raising these same issues before Parliament. I cannot overemphasize that everything that we are saying to you today and that we put before the Commons Committee has been previously put to department officials during the consultation process over the past months and years. Nothing we are saying is new. All of our points have been raised by not only ourselves but also by the Indian Resource Council. The department has never provided good reasons to either ourselves, to the Indian Resource Council, or to Parliament as to why our points have not been incorporated into Bill C-5. Mr. Chair, any questions directed to me will be answered by my technician, John Snow, or by my legal counsel. Thank you. My fellow Chief Poucette, has further comments about this consultation process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief Labelle and Senators. The Minister and his Parliamentary Secretary have argued that to open the bill to amendments at this stage would require the consultation process with First Nations to be restarted. However, The amendments proposed by the Stoney Nakoda Nation have in fact